Hello, good morning. I'm hoping to talk about planning and supporting innovative work actions. But this is a BPM conference, so I'll have to talk a little bit about BPM. But I'd like to challenge you a little bit to think not only what it is that people do for BPM, but why we do BPM, what it's good for, and what it's maybe not good for, and what we can do about that. So I start with a very simple question. What is information technology for? And the answer, quite simply, is stability, especially in a dynamic world. The whole point of the IT department, the purpose, is to organize information, make sure that workers have what they need to get their job done every day, and to save up requests and queue them up and store them so that you don't have to handle everything at once, and you could smooth out the workload and basically smooth out the day-to-day operations of a business. And innovation is about novel ideas and bringing new things to the workplace. So if we want innovative organizations, and we need them, Alberto showed the picture of how the world had changed in just 8 years. And it's a great example of how we have to deal, certainly in the IT space. One example I often use is the bring your own device, okay? These smartphones that everybody has and they want to use in the workplace. And 8 years ago, those didn't exist. The iPhone didn't exist. And now we have to deal with that. And that's only one small example of how we have to deal with change on a daily basis. So the world's changing, and we're seeing businesses adopt new business models rapidly, and that's your competition. And so if your goal with your IT department is to keep everything nice and stable, then you're putting the IT department, your IT systems, directly in contradiction to what your business goals are, and that's a problem. So what I'd like to talk about today is what does it really mean to set up an IT system to support innovation, okay? To support change. I'll talk a little bit about what that system has to look like and what features it might have. Well, a lot of IT designers, when they will look at building a system, they sort of think of something like this, okay? A very elaborate, very carefully defined system with intricate parts that are precisely defined and fit perfectly together. And this is great. This is a watch here. These indicate that there are little jewels in there, very hard stones that hold the gears in place. And by having an extremely hard stone there, it allows the watch to run for a very, very long time. So when we design machines and we design systems, we often employ these principles in making a system that's going to last for a long time. If you're designing a car, an automobile, for instance, this is exactly what you want. You want very, very well-defined pieces, and you want them made out of very hard metals so that they last a long time. And then you have a car that will last a long time. Okay? But IT systems are different, and human organizations are different. Human organizations are anti-fragile. One of the reasons that we always try to design our IT systems as if they were a machine is because of what I call the Enlightenment Bias. And this comes back to ideas brought forward by Newton and Descartes that, that underneath natural phenomena and all phenomena that we see are very simple rules. There's some sort of simple rule underneath there. So, as Newton said, F equals ma, force equals mass times acceleration. A nice simple rule that explains an awful lot about our environment. Well, that leads us to what I call the Enlightenment Bias. And there's a couple aspects to it. One is that in a complex system, that the smaller parts of the system are going to be less complex. Okay, that's what you think, right? I mean, that's what I was grown up knowing. If you want to solve a difficult problem, break it into little pieces and solve the little pieces of the problem. Okay, but complex systems don't necessarily work that way. They cannot necessarily be decomposed. So that's actually a kind of an illusion. The other one is that a stable system is made from very hard, very durable parts. And so, I mean, this seems logical to us. But what you need to do to understand how to build a system that allows you to change is to understand that that can be an illusion. Well, in this case, let's imagine that you've got two anti-fragile systems, okay? Two human organizations. Think of this like your organization here. Now, what he says is that if you protect the organization, it can possibly turn into a fragile system. Doesn't that same principle hold true in business processes? Shouldn't we have a variety of different processes so that if there ends up being a small flaw in that process, it doesn't wipe out the whole organization? Okay? So just think about things a little bit differently. We know that nature loves small errors. That's how ecosystems work. An ecosystem doesn't work because it's extremely well defined to have exactly the right parts, but it has a whole bunch of different things in there. And those bunch of different things work as the environment changes, those little things work better and less. But what Taleb is warning us against here is that people don't like this idea. They don't like this idea of having a bunch of different ways to do things. I mean, we inherently want to find the one best process and put that into use. And what I'm trying to say here is that's dangerous. There's some danger to that. Case management is about not trying to define that process ahead of time, but instead providing information resources to knowledge workers. And knowledge workers build on their own knowledge about the situation. Now, to talk about this, I need to talk about a spectrum of different types of applications. So on the far left, you have traditional application development. And that is programming. Okay, so that's the stuff we've known for 30 years, 40 years, creating software. And that works for a lot of things. I mean, if you're running a fast food restaurant and you want a process to support that, then traditional application development will do fine because it's a very well-defined process and you have control over it and those work. On this end, we have no process at all. This is just telephoning people, emailing people, texting people, Twittering now. So there's no process at all. But in the middle of that, we've got this area which we've called BPM. But in fact, BPM really can be divided out into about 5 different things. And I'll go through each of these in a little bit of detail. But the new category we're talking about here is in the ACM space. And that's where knowledge workers are actually figuring out what they have to do, where they're innovating, they're bringing in new practices. And that's where we have the IT system to support that sort of thing. So there's a couple of differences that ACM brings. And the first is that in the case of a case management, data becomes the center. You've heard a lot, you'll hear a lot today about BPM and process being the center of the whole thing. But with case management, data tends to be the center of it. Case management tends to look at guidance as opposed to enforcement. Okay, enforcement is like guardrails on either side of the road. Guidance is like lines down the middle. Here's what you should do. Here's what people in your situation typically do. You can do that if you want, or you can do something else. Because a knowledge worker needs to have the flexibility to do something different. A good example of a knowledge worker is a doctor. Okay, so a doctor, of course, there's very well-known procedures for treating patients with certain problems, but some patients have very unusual problems, especially if it's combined with multiple symptoms. And the doctor has to have the ability to prescribe other courses of action that had never been tried before.